You're listening to the Hella Well with Danielle show, a podcast taking women of color on a journey exploring all things wellness and travel related. We're all about showing you how to put on your oxygen mask first and creating lasting self-care habits that will free you to travel the world and live the life you truly desire, and not one you have to fake loving. I'm your host, Danielle Washington. Now let's buckle up and start this journey. Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Hello Well with Danielle podcast. I am your host, Danielle Washington, and today I have a special guest. As people are getting ready to travel more and they're thinking about traveling, they may not want to travel alone. But then you want to travel with someone else, but you want to bring a friend, but not every friend is the friend you want to be traveling with. And that's what I want to talk today. And I have my special guest, my travel buddy, Brittany, who we've traveled different countries together, and I love and trust her. And I know she travels with a lot of different people as well. And so I thought, what other person than her to come on and talk to you guys about picking your travel buddy? Because again, it really does matter, and kind of figuring out like what are the things you need to be thinking about before you book that flight. Before you book anything, you want to make sure that you're vetting them and you're looking to things, figuring out how they work with you, and some other things I want to talk about. So make sure you have pen and paper because this is going to be a great episode for you to learn and make sure you're getting out there traveling and not ending friendships. Hey, Brittany, thank you for joining me on the Hello Well with Danielle podcast. How are you this morning?
I'm well. Thank you for having
I
me.
love it. So when I wanted to talk about travel buddies, I couldn't think of anyone else but my own personal travel buddy to be on here for this talk. And we met in a travel group, No Madness. We met on a trip. And I don't even know how we ended up going on our first trip together. I know when you called.
Yeah, it was like that year where there was that major
Glitch.
crazy travel deal to South Africa.
Yeah. And so, one thing I want to talk about is like, you can have the wrong person traveling with you. You can have the best friend in the world, and I've had that experience where I had a good friend who I traveled with, and it ended our relationship, and so I think picking the right person to travel with is so important. What do you look for in a travel buddy?
For me, I look for someone that is flexible, someone that is, relatively adventurous when it comes to food. I don't want to be on a trip with somebody and every place we go, like, oh, I don't eat this, I don't eat that. That would annoy me. I tend to be relatively active. So, someone that's active, someone that we enjoy the same activities, but at the same time, someone that's also independent. So if there's an activity they want to do or I want to do, I want them to be comfortable enough, like, oh, okay, you don't want to go see this play, I'll go by myself. Or I want to go shopping, but you don't, I'll stay in the room.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily because sometimes you can go on a trip with somebody and they feel like since we're on this trip together, we have to do everything together. And that can be a little annoying,
Yeah.
to be honest.
And I've had that before. I call that the clingy traveler, where I had, a good friend on a trip, and she would not leave my side for any means necessary. I was just like, "Yo, like, there's all these different things you can do, and wait, we're in a group trip,
Mhm.
so I'm gonna get another car." And, like, when I would try to get another car, she'd be like, "No, I'm coming with you." And I'm like, "But we're all going to the same spot. It's just another car.
Yeah.
Breathe, sis."
Mhm.
And I love the fact you talked about the independence. Like, how do you approach that situation? Like when you wanna be independent, like, do you ask beforehand, or do you be like, "Hey, I wanna do this, um, and I wanna do it by myself," or, "I don't do this, I know you don't wanna do this." Like, how do you approach that conversation?
Well, I think prior to the trip, you have a general idea of what each person wants to do. And then, once you get there, you get settled, you just kind of have a conversation like, hey, I want to go to this museum. You're welcome to come, but if not, you can stay here, no problem. And, they can do the same thing, vice versa. And just hopefully both of us are okay with having some alone time, which I think is, good in general. But even especially when you're on a trip with somebody, because you don't want to necessarily feel like you have no time to yourself when you're on vacation
Yeah.
because you're with the you're on a trip with a girlfriend.
No, and I think that's important. And I also think for me, what do I look for in a travel buddy? I like you, I do look for someone who wants to eat probably the similar things, which is interesting now that I'm quasi or potentially going vegan fully. I don't even know what that
Mhm.
looks like for me food-wise because before it was like, "Oh, let's try all these different things." And now I'm like, "Damn, does that limit like my, flexibility in what I was eating?" And, that's something I think about when I have to consider that. But I also think about like spending styles. I don't know if you've had ever
Mhm.
issues with someone with spending styles, but for me, I've had people who wanna go on the trip, and then they're like, "Well, I don't wanna spend a lot of money on food. Like, I wanna go to the cheapest tourist spot." And I'm like, "But we're on vacation, and this place is supposed to be one of the most
Right.
bomb places." Like, have you had that experience?
I have not had that experience, but I can understand, how that would be frustrating. And obviously, I have travel buddies and we don't all necessarily make the same amount of money. I have friends that are doing a lot
Yeah.
better than me, friends that are around the same, some that, make less money than me. And, we're all able to make it work again, as long as you just have some type of general understanding. And I'm also the type of person that if there's an activity that I really want to do, and say my friend is like, "Oh, that's a little expensive, I can't afford it," I'll be willing to cover it because I want to have that experience and I want my friend to have it with me. But not everybody is like that.
Yeah. And I think that's great that when you know that's something that you really wanna do, you're like, "Okay, well, I'll cover this cost because I wanna do this." And I think a lot of people, like you said, don't do that. What are things that you try to discuss in advance? Like, I feel like there's a conversation that needs to be had, or actually before we even get there, how do you even vet a potential travel buddy?
Hmm. Well, I think the more time you spend with someone, you kind of have a general idea of would I enjoy being on a trip with this person.
Mhm.
And another thing I think you can do is just, ask some general questions like, when you're on vacation, what types of things do you enjoy doing? You know, because there are some people, they can go to the beach, stay at the beach all day, and they can be completely fine with that. Whereas there are other people that they're not really beach people. So obviously, if you're not really a beach person, I'm not going to invite you to go to the Caribbean with me, but you may want to go somewhere else where a beach isn't a big part of it. So I
Exactly.
think it really comes down to just making sure you're compatible, you have similar interests. And just again, just asking those questions that are necessary in order to ensure that, oh, I think we would have a great trip together because, we get along, we like to do the same things.
Yeah, and I don't really know. I like you. I'm like, I thought when I was coming up with questions, I'm like, how do I vet people? Because again, I have thought that we'd be cool, like people that I was friends with, like we get along. But I've had experiences where I'm like, this is not the person I want to travel with. Or like, I've gone with, a group of girls where my one of my good girlfriends and I both brought our relatives with us, and both of our relatives were not our travel style. We were our travel styles, but our
Okay.
relatives weren't our travel style. Like one wanted to stay at the hotel pool all day, and I'm just like, We're in Panama. Why would you do that?" Or the other
Hmm.
one was like, "I'm too scared to go to all these places." And we're like, "Well, why are you here?" And so I don't it's I always figure out what has happened from that experience is I like to like you were talking about, have a conversation. So there's certain things I like to talk about in advance. One of the things I like to talk about in advance is budget. I don't know if that's something you talk to people about. And like how do you kind of gauge that conversation?
No, definitely budget is important because I think it's easy to just initially look at like how much the flight costs and how much the hotel, and that definitely is a part of the amount of the trip, but you still have to eat once you get there. What excursions do you want to do if you plan on doing any shopping? So I definitely think that's an important conversation to have up front so that each party knows, like, okay, this trip could potentially cost, a grand or 1,500. what have you, just so
Mm.
that each person knows and there's not any surprises.
No, that makes sense, and I know you talked about if, for you, it's if they're adventurous, if they're eating their space and, being independent. Pace is another good one for me. I don't know about that for you. Like, I didn't think about pace until we went to Epcot with my aunt. Granted, I was hella young, so I didn't have a
Mhm.
say in none of this, but my aunt wanted to get through
Yeah.
Epcot in a day. And she just basically pushed us to go, like, we're going from place to place to place, and it's like we never stopped, and, like, I don't want someone for me, I can't travel with someone who wants to do, like, everything right away and, like, the day is
Mhm.
completely full. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then I think for me, accommodation style is another one. Um,
Mhm.
and it depends for me, I think the same thing for you, and I think that's why we get along. It depends where we're going. So, like, I
Yeah,
know
absolutely.
I like Airbnbs, but I don't have to stay in an Airbnb.
Absolutely.
Um, so what other type of accommodation styles do you like?
Well, I would say that I have evolved. When I first started traveling, and in particular traveling by myself, I was really big on hostels because, I was trying to, spend as little money as possible on accommodations. Because again, the way I looked at it at the time is that I'm going to spend very little time in this room. So it doesn't have to be fancy,
Yeah.
schmancy, or whatever. But then a few years ago, I want to say, it's had something maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I stayed at my last hostel. I was in Hong Kong and I was just like, you know what? I think I have outgrown the hostel experience.
What happened?
Just for the simple fact, say that
So what
again.
happened?
Well, it wasn't necessarily anything bad that happened, but again, I was being cheap, and hotels in particular in Hong Kong can be very expensive.
Yeah.
So I was in a room with, I want to say, I think maybe it was like 4 to 6 beds. I can't remember.
Okay.
But I just remember like the next day when I woke up, having to like tiptoe because people are asleep. And then the bathroom was just super small. And I was just like, you know what? I'm over this. So I ended up leaving the hostel. I ended up leaving the hostel sooner than I was supposed to. And I ended up finding a hotel that was relatively inexpensive, and I just needed to have my own space, and I didn't want to have to
Yeah.
tiptoe every morning or every time I come back to the room and be cognizant of other people. So I don't. I mean, hostels are a great option because they do have private rooms. I mean, those tend to be more expensive, but they're great. I think everybody should stay in a hostel at least once. But now that I'm a little bit older, I my first choice tends to be an Airbnb. I have typically had very positive experiences in Airbnbs, and then again, like you said, depending on the place, if the Airbnb is not like the better option, then I'll go, for the hotel route. But normally hotels are like my second
Yeah.
choice.
No, that makes sense. I've only stayed in a hostel once, and it was in Japan,
Okay.
and it was a good experience. It was like one of those hostels. But it was, like,
Hmm.
pretty nice, and I was like and it was just for literally I had a layover, so I was like, "I can handle 1 day layover." But for me, I don't know, it's actually funny, I've always been anti-hostel, and I think more recently, I've been a little bit more open to it, but at the same time, I'm
Hmm.
like, I do like to have my own space, so yeah, it makes a difference, and I do like Airbnbs because I feel like I like traveling like I'm a local, and so I feel like, "Oh, let's stay in a house or something that's, not a hotel with 50,000,000 people," and so that's kind
Hmm.
of one of the things I like to look for. Like, one of the things I always realize, things are gonna happen even if it's the best travel buddy in the world. How do you handle disagreements when you're traveling?
I think the best thing to do is just face it head on. If we're not getting along, or if there was a disagreement, something happened, you pissed me off or I pissed you off, just have a conversation about like, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do XYZ, and hopefully we can come to an agreement, and both of us should be able to apologize, accept each other's apology, and then still make the best of the trip because you don't want to have drama with somebody. And even after you apologize, they're still holding it over your head and it ends up being a terrible trip,
Yeah.
because of not seeing eye to eye on something.
No, I definitely agree with that. I agree with the, not putting it off, being direct, but also actively listening because I think oftentimes when you're in those situations, most people, especially with people who are not used to being direct. And one thing I love about you, you are direct. People are like, well, I don't, they want to say anything and they wait until it gets really bad and then they're like all emotional. And so like, I think when people are emotional, it's important to like actively listen and be willing to compromise. I think that's huge.
Absolutely.
And that's one thing I do love about in a travel buddy, someone who is willing to compromise. It's like we may want different things to some degree, but I love the fact that when I have a good travel buddy like you, they're able to compromise on different things. So yeah, like what are certain travel personalities that you're like, I can't travel with this person?
I would say somebody that's overly a planner, somebody that, every day, this is what we're doing in the morning, this is what we're doing in the afternoon, this is what we're doing, pretty much every day is blocked out with an activity. And that will probably not work for me because I feel like when you have every minute of the day planned out, that leaves no time or opportunities for spontaneity,
Yeah.
you know? So that would be annoying just because I don't, I'm typically the type of person that I may have a general idea of what I want to see before I arrive in a particular country, but typically, I get there and then I see like, okay, what do I want to see? And then I just kind of figure it out as I go.
Yeah.
There's never, I mean, there may be some things that are booked in advance, like if I'm going to Paris and I had never seen the Eiffel Tower. Okay, I probably have booked tickets to the Eiffel Tower or tickets to the Louvre, but outside of that, things that I need a ticket for, I pretty much just kind of figure it out once I get there.
No, I think that and it's funny you say that because I think back in the day, like way, way back, I used to be a total planner. And then I just kind of was like, I'm just kind of to go with the flow. And because I love the ability to, be spontaneous and see different things. But I feel like if you over
Mhm.
plan, you're so here that you may miss out on this great local thing someone just told you about.
Exactly.
What was that?
I said exactly.
Yeah. And I think for me, another type of person who I can't travel with is someone who's frustrated easily. I don't know about you.
Okay. Yeah, I've kind of had experiences like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. I mean, because for me, like stuff goes wrong on trips. I don't know about you, but I've never had a trip where everything went exactly as planned. Have you?
That's probably doubtful. No, no, but I have been on a trip with someone I know, and great person. We still travel well, but one of the things I noticed the last time we took a trip was that she could be easily frustrated with when things would happen, and I in my mind I'm just like, take a deep breath. It's not a big deal. Like no need to get irritated about it. It's not that deep. But that was one thing that I kind of picked up on when we were on a trip together. Not that I wouldn't still travel with her. I would,
Yeah.
but it was just something that I noticed. I was like, huh, okay. I hadn't noticed that before. And I think, like you said, that's one thing about having a travel buddy is that you can be great friends with somebody and you feel like you know them well. And then as soon as you take a trip with them, you kind of see a different side of them. And sometimes that can be a positive thing,
Yeah.
or sometimes that can be a negative thing. But it's just, if you and your girlfriend live in the same city, you get in your routine, you just kind of, everything is pretty much, where everything is and it's no big deal. Then you take them out of their comfort zone where they're unfamiliar with the country, with the language, and then you kind of see how they adapt or not adapt to those new changes.
Yeah, and you definitely see usually pretty quick in those situations. Another one for me is someone who is, I call it the tardy for the party, who's always late, just always consistently like you're waiting on them for like I have people where I'm literally waiting to go somewhere for over an hour just because they're taking that long.
That's unacceptable.
Yeah, that's my thought so too. That's why I was like,
I mean, not since we're a little late, but no, I'm not gonna have somebody waiting for an hour. That's
yeah, a little
ridiculous.
late, I don't care. It's like, okay, whatever. Like we're on vacation, whatever. Time is kind of,
Right.
not really that important. But when someone's like just completely disrespectful of other people's time. Like and especially and
Mhm.
I find this more when you're traveling in groups. Like, when you're out traveling one-on-one with a travel buddy, I don't see this as much, but when I've seen this traveling in groups where there's, like, that one person who's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna take my time. Oh, wait, we're actually getting up. Great, you guys are about to walk out the door. I'm gonna get in the shower. Just wait for me."
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other type of person, we talked about the clingy. For me, this is the person who I'm like, I know that I can't travel with, are people who never pull out their wallet when it comes time to pay.
No. I've never had that experience before.
You're lucky. You're lucky. And it's just like it's one of those things where I'm like, I saw you eat. I saw you go on in this taxi with me, so I'm really
Yeah.
confused. Why is it that you're like, "Oh, it's just gonna magically pay itself?"
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, like you said, talking about finances and all that. And I think typically when I'm on a trip with one of my buddies, we tend to like take turns paying for stuff. So if we go out to eat, I'll cover this meal, you cover the next meal. If we go have drinks, okay, this round is on, just kind of take turns so that not one person is paying for everything. And we don't, not everything has to be tit for tat either, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
But definitely don't want to feel like you're being taken advantage of. That's never a good feeling.
I think a lot of that comes with also, like you were saying before, really knowing that person. I think some people just travel without necessarily knowing that person or having a good sense of who they are to know what type
Mhm.
of person they can travel with. And I think that's a huge thing. They're like,
Absolutely.
"Oh, this person just travels all the time, so I can travel with this person. I'm just tagging along," and not realizing that, "Oh, I don't really know this person, and I don't really like the way that they travel." Which goes to a
Right.
good point. What are your deal breakers, like, in terms of, like, I can't travel. We won't travel again, or I can't travel with this type of person.
That would be someone that's inflexible, someone that is, I would say, culturally insensitive.
I mean, I know
Um,
what you mean by that, but what do you mean by that?
I guess just like, say for example, we're going to a Muslim country, I've been to a few different Muslim countries, and they're all different. Some of them are a little more conservative than others, and some of them are a little more lax. But, like if I were to go on a trip with somebody and I'm like, hey, I think you should maybe wear a different top, maybe some longer shorts, because this is a Muslim country and you want to be respected. And they're like, no, I'm going to do me regardless of where I'm at. No, no, that that's not no, that would not work for me because at the end of the day, like you have to respect another culture, regardless of if you're American or whatever. Like you are a guest in someone else's country, and if this is the norm, you need to try to follow those norms as much as you can. Yeah, obviously, just by looking at you, they're gonna know. Okay, she's probably not from here. I know that, but that still doesn't necessarily give you a right to just be disrespectful because if you dress a certain way in a particular country, you are asking for a certain type of attention. And I like to fly under the radar. Even if I know I'm not going to be able to blend in, I want to be able to blend in as much as possible.
Yeah.
So if you're that type of person that no, you're going to be you regardless of where you are, no, that would not work for me.
No, I feel you on that one, and because I think that's important. I think a lot of Americans don't think about the other culture when they're traveling,
No.
and they are very insensitive to that. I think when I do my rogue experiences trips, one of the things I always talk about before we go on the trip is being sensitive to the culture and blending in because
Hmm.
like you were saying, like in a Muslim country, you don't want to be dressed up in some hoochie outfit, short shorts, and heels walking down the street.
Right. Because it's also a matter of safety. Like you don't want to necessarily just be a target because of what you have on. And it's not even necessarily, I mean, this could be like I remember a few years ago, I went to Brazil, and I remember reading up because I try to read up a little bit
Yeah,
on where I'm going before I go, and they were like, "Hey, there's a lot of crime in this particular area, so you don't want to wear anything flashy, anything that's going to cause a lot of attention, because again, you can be a target for theft." So that's the same. I'm not a flashy person in general, but as I read that, I almost kind of was curious. Like, man, should I not wear my Apple Watch because I don't want this to make me a target? I mean, I still wore it and it was fine, but just trying to blend in as much as possible. Don't be Gucci down to the socks. Like, no, they already, a lot of people already think Americans are rich. So
exactly.
if you come in and you have all this jewelry on or all these name brand clothing, you could be an easy target, and nobody wants to be a victim of being assaulted or being robbed in another country. Like, no, thank you.
No, I agree with you. So I do try to dress the part whenever I am traveling. It's funny you talked about the crime and the watch. I remember being in Naples, Italy, with my then boyfriend at the time. Now, definitely ex-boyfriend at the time. Now, and they were like, "You need to take off the watch. You need to take off this," and we're like, "Oh, like this is basically like they're like, no, like you need to take everything off." And like at first he was kinda like, I don't wanna take it off." I'm like, yeah, we're gonna be safe. You're gonna take off that watch." So I do
Yeah.
think that's important in those type of things as well. So what else are not so you said, cultural insensitivity, flexibility, what else is your non like your we can't travel ever?
Again, I think back to what I said earlier. Someone that's not adventurous in terms of cuisines. Somebody that they just want to eat McDonald's everywhere we go. Now, don't get me wrong, McDonald's in different countries is different than the McDonald's that we have here in the US.
True.
But I want to be with somebody that's like, oh, this is a delicacy of Turkey. Let's try this. Or, even if it sounds like unappealing, let's just try it because we're here. So somebody that was just, I don't want to refer to that type of person as basic, but
But
just someone that's just not an adventurous eater.
yeah.
That would be annoying.
And
I'll put
someone
it
who's
like
looking for
that.
McDonald's in other countries, 9 out of 10, they don't realize that McDonald's in other countries are probably different.
Yeah.
Let's be real.
So, I mean, I don't have a problem if every country you want to go to McDonald's at least once.
Yeah, that's different.
That makes complete sense. But I don't want to eat at American restaurants if I'm not in America. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's funny, that's what my parents do. I mean, they don't eat at American restaurants, but that's why they cruise because they aren't adventurous in food. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of for them. They wanna go everywhere, but they don't wanna eat the food. And so, like, I love my parents, but they're not people who I'd wanna necessarily travel with in that level unless they're paying for a really expensive trip, then I could, go through this situation. But, like, I wanna try different foods, and again, that's why one of those things I'm like, "God, if I stick with this vegan and plant-based diet," I'm like, "Does that really change how I travel?" Which I'm like, "That would kinda suck for me."
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you will definitely have some limitations, but I think you'll be okay. Again, obviously, it depends on the country.
Yeah.
But I think knowing you like I know you, if you were in a particular situation where you had to eat, meat or something, I think you would, it wouldn't be like, oh, I refuse to eat. You would make the best of the situation because, obviously you have to eat to survive.
Yeah.
Thought of another thing as I was answering that question. And then, as much as I love traveling with my parents, they're wonderful people. But one of the things that kind of annoys me sometimes when I'm with them is that, say for example, we go shopping, the price is in euros or, whatever. Brittany, can you tell me how much money this is? And I'm just be like, I told you there's this conversion app you can download on your phone. And, but I've noticed that sometimes when I'm with other people that aren't as well traveled as myself, they tend to look to me to answer all these little things. But I'm just like, you could just download this app and figure it out yourself, and you wouldn't necessarily have to ask me for every little thing. That's a little annoying. So again, I think that goes back to being independent. Like download your conversion apps and all those things so that you can help yourself and you don't have to be necessarily a burden to someone else.
No, and I agree with that one because I don't think we always think about that. As we both have traveled a lot in our lives and, are well versed in traveling. When you're with someone who's maybe this is their first time coming out of the country, you know, and they aren't someone who is independent in terms of the personality, they may depend on you for everything, like you're saying, like, "Well, what's the conversion rate? What did they say?" Like, and I'm like, "Dude, you have Google Translate on your phone just like I do." And that
Exactly.
would get annoying to me after a bit, so I do agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
So I think that's everything. Like, I think we have covered how to vet people, how to deal with our disagreements, whatever our no deal breakers. Is there anything else that would, if you had to give advice on picking a travel buddy that you would give, what advice would you give?
I think the most important thing is just, like you said, making sure we are on the same accord in terms of our budget for the trip, so that we know upfront how much everything is supposed to cost. Having a conversation about what types of activities you both want to participate in, and in the event that you're not interested in a particular activity, are you okay with spending some time by yourself? I think that's important. um and I'm feeling like those aren't the most important, but those are the two that immediately come to mind. And just, I think, more importantly, just having an open and honest conversation about what are each other's expectations, so that everybody's on the same page. And at the end of the day, just being flexible, and, at the end of the day, just trying to be open to having a good time, no matter what that looks like.
Yeah.
Because that's what I mean. That's why we ultimately vacation. Nobody spends all this money to go to a different state or go to another country to have a horrible time. No, we both want to have the best time as possible. So just having that open communication about how can we both have a trip that we both enjoy.
Yeah. And it's funny, one thing that you brought up when I was listening to talk that we didn't bring up for me that I think is like a no-brainer. You want a travel buddy that you trust, that's trustworthy.
Hmm.
And I think that's important because if you don't, I mean, you're traveling and sometimes in a not safe location, you want someone who, and you're spending your money, these trips usually are, probably like 1,000 plus. You want someone who you trust with you on this trip. So that's something I would always kind of point out as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So at the end of every episode, I like to ask my guests these quick fire questions. So whatever comes to mind, just answer whatever comes to mind. First thing comes to mind. So you ready?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So what does living hella well mean to you?
Living hella well to me means just in general being happy. you know, being happy on your job, being happy in your personal life, being healthy, taking good care of yourself, be that self care or exercise, just trying to be happy in every aspect of your life and just trying to make the most of every moment.
Love that. Aisle or window?
Window,
I was like, hmm.
all the time.
What's always in your travel bag?
Okay, always in my obviously my phone, my charger for my phone. You gotta have your charger. If I'm going to the beach, that's gonna be sunscreen. Always gotta have hand sanitizer, lip gloss, um, portable battery in case my phone dies and I can't charge my phone. Um, Travel journal, so that would be a pen, and probably some candy of some sort.
Candy. I didn't know that one about you. I was
I
like,
love
hmm. Love that one. My next question is, when did you realize that you were Black or a person of color?
it. Ooh, that is a tough question. I'm gonna say probably maybe like in middle school, I guess. I mean, I feel like that sounds so late. But I think for me, I grew up in a black neighborhood up until I was probably about 7 or 8. And then once I was 8, we moved to the suburbs, which was much more, I would say at the time, it was probably maybe half and half, or it may have been more white than black.
Yeah.
And then once I got to middle school, white flight happened, and then you realize, okay, they're moving because we're moving in. And so then you start to kind of realize that distinction between, like, oh, okay, you know, some white people, not all obviously, are not a fan when their neighborhood gets a little black. They don't like that.
No,
So
well, they sometimes don't, unfortunately. And my last question is, part of what we're doing is creating this wellness revolution for women of color to make their self-care a priority. What advice would you give to your younger self?
hmm. I would tell my younger self to not be so concerned with body image, because I think eventually you will get to a place. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I don't still have my struggles, because I do.
But
But
you
I
look
think when I
amazing,
was
by the way.
younger, say it
But
again.
you look amazing, by the way, always.
But I think when I was younger, I was just it was, all I cared about was what I looked like, and everything had to be perfect. I couldn't leave the house without at least having some lip gloss on, and all of those things. But now as I'm older, I will leave the house without makeup, and it's fine. It's no big deal. But yeah, when I was younger, that's all I cared about, because I felt like only the most important thing about me was my appearance, was
Yeah.
what I looked like. But as you get older, you realize that I have more to offer than just my looks.
You do. You are amazing wealth of knowledge. You are funny, and you are one of my favorite people to travel with. Thank you so much for being on the
Oh,
podcast
thank
today and
you.
taking
Thank
your
you for
time. And
having me.
I can't wait to travel with you again soon. I miss you.
Yes, I'm waiting for you to come to
How
DC.
did I know that was coming out of you?
Yeah, I've been here for a few years now, and I still haven't gotten that text. Hey, I'm coming in town. But one day I'm gonna get it.
One day you're going to get that. I swear. It may even be this year. Who knows, you know?
That would be amazing.
All right, you guys. Thank you again for joining us for another episode. Thanks for joining us this week on the Hello Well with Danielle show. Make sure to visit our website, hellowellwithdanielle.com, where you can subscribe to our show on iTunes, Spotify, and Amazon Music and never miss an episode. Also, you can follow us on social media at Hello Well with Danielle on Facebook and Instagram, and Hello Well Danny on Twitter. And if you hella love the show and got some good nuggets out of it, know that I'm not too proud to ask for you to please leave a rating or review on iTunes so that we can continue to expand our reach and help other women of color. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you next week. Ciao.